Okay, I think I'm going to wait just about one more minute. I see the participants going up, so. Okay, well, it's just past 12, so we'll get started. Good afternoon and welcome to our Arts and Resilience series. My name is Margarita Ortiz. As a fellow of the Center for Humanities and Ethics at the McGovern Medical School in Houston, Texas, I have the great honor and privilege of introducing our first speaker in this Arts and Resilience series, Laura Spector. Mrs. Spector is not only locally acclaimed, but is also recognized nationally and internationally as artist and art educator. Laura Spector is best known for her 1996 Museum Anatomy project, which I heard her discuss in rich detail at the recent University of Houston's Innovations in Arts and Health Conference in October of 2022. She is a visual artist, unafraid of using different mediums and styles. So her work provokes reflection at all levels of understanding and to diverse audiences, including loyal admirers and the students that she mentors. I am one such admirer of her work. I had the opportunity to see it on display at an art exhibit she organized to present the work of her students, one of whom is a talented developmental pediatrician and art and medicine educator, Dr. Anson Koshi, from our very own McGovern Center. Mrs. Spector's accomplishments are many, many more than I can mention in this short amount of time, but if we are lucky, we may be privileged one day to attend a class or two where she teaches, whether privately, an intensive international seminar at the Art League of Houston, Watercolor Art Society of Houston, or at Rice University's Glasscock School of Continuing Studies. Currently, she has been selected as artist in residence for the Joan Mitchell Foundation in this April of 2023. Her work will also be featured in September of 2023, when she will hold a solo art show at Georgetown Artwork in the Austin area. To read more about Laura Spector's accomplishments and to see selected work, including past sessions of Arts and Resilience, I invite you to explore her personal website, which I will share with you in the chat at the end of our session. Laura is no stranger to our conference series. She has shared her talent with us in the past, first as inaugural speaker, when she returned to share her work on drawing for surgeons a year later. And there she stressed drawing as a very valuable tool for training in surgical specialties. But today, she joins us to discuss grief and healing in a new group exhibition, Whole, Grief, Apology, Healing. It focuses on grief, apology, and healing. And this exhibit was recently featured on Houston Matters with Craig Cohen of the Houston Public Media, as well as on 90.1 KPFT with Michael Carson. The exhibition is currently on display at the Junk Center of Houston and through December 20th. But we're also very privileged and very much looking forward to displaying her pieces from this exhibit this January 2023 in the McGovern Medical School Art Wall. So a note about questions. We want to encourage a robust conversation, so please do not hesitate to put your questions in the chat, but just note that we will address them at the conclusion of the talk. So now, without any further delay, please join me and the McGovern Center in welcoming the very talented Laura Spector today.
Thank you so much. That was quite an introduction. Thank you. That was so generous. I'm so excited to be back here again with McGovern. I love doing these arts and resilience lectures. It's a very hospitable audience always. So thank you so much for joining me. I am going to share some content with you. I'm going to be going back and forth between my presentation on Keynote and then a website. So there will be a little bit of, flickering back and forth with technology. Let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my PDF to start. So here you should see a screen come up. Whole is the name of the exhibition currently. It's a group show. 6 artists are involved. And this is currently at the Young Center until December 20th. So if you like what you see during this presentation I really encourage you to go by and see the artwork in person for yourself. The website, drawingfromthewound.weebly.com, is our website, and there you will hear all of the recordings that go along with the artwork. The Young Center Houston, that's their website. And then my website is my name, lauraspector.com. I want to start at the very, very beginning of this. Where did this idea come from? Where did it spring from? I lived in Thailand for 10 years, and I would probably even say maybe earlier. I was guesstimating these dates. I'm so terrible with dates. So I was guessing 2007, 2008. It might have actually been 1 or 2 years prior to that. I had a factory space studio, and I decided I wanted to get into painting portraits. I hadn't really studied a tremendous amount about portrait art. This is pre-internet. Well, there was some internet. It was definitely pre-cell phone days. And I was asking people that I knew to come in and sit for me, and they would sit in a 3-hour format. So they would sit down, and for 3 hours we would talk. Some of these people I knew very well. Others I had never met. I just, met them out and about and asked them to come to my studio. And for 3 hours we would chat. And there was no recording device, but I noticed a system. Whereas the first hour people would talk, they would kind of talk about generalities, world political views, what's happening in other countries. The second hour, I noticed they would start getting closer to their country of origin, and they would start talking about kind of their home, what was happening politically around them, what might be happening in their neighborhoods, why they moved or visited Thailand. And then the third hour, it would be very personal. They would, I guess, trust had been built up, someone staring at them, looking at them, investigating them. I wasn't really talking back. So it was kind of like just me listening. And they were really interesting stories that were very personal, everything leading from sickness, what's going on with their families, or how they had to leave their family, or who they were missing, or one woman had escaped Idi Amin's prison, and it was just epic stories that were very personal. And I painted them. And afterwards I was like, I should have recorded these stories. Then I visited New York. I was staying with my now husband, and I would meet people when I was in New York, and I would ask them if I could paint them because they were interesting. They were doing interesting things. They were really interesting to look at. Mark Hudson, who was of the Hudson Brothers, you might know him from Aerosmith. He wrote the song "Living on the Edge" and won a Grammy for it. He was talking to people in a Starbucks, and I just went up to him and I was like, "Hey, can I paint you? Would you be interested?" He was like, "Yeah." So I brought my then boyfriend with me, and we went over to his place, and I painted him for 3 hours, and he told us stories, and they were incredible stories. Anton Fig, he was the drummer on David Letterman's band. And again, 3 hours, lots of stories. At that point, I was like, I really need to record stories to show with these paintings. So it started then, and then this idea started developing. By the time 2019 rolled around, I had a collaboration I was in for 25 years, the one that included museum anatomy, and that collaboration dissolved. And it was the first time that I had really experienced grief. I mean, I've experienced before with the loss of pets and leaving family behind to live overseas, but I never, and I also had gone through a divorce, but I had never experienced the depth of grief I did with separating from a collaborator. It was devastating, and I didn't think I could make art anymore. And I was going to therapy at the time, and I came to the realization, well, I can make art if I gather other people around me to make it. So like, I want to be in a collaborative. I just work really well collaboratively. And I didn't think I could stand on my own at that point in time. So I called these people. I knew them all. You can see in this picture from 2019, Ellie Orsic all the way on the left, and Peggy Stoip, Terry Wheeler, Pat McHenry, who was my first studio mate when I first moved to Houston. As a matter of fact, Ellie Orsic's the first artist I met when I moved to Houston. I gathered these people together, and I said, I've got this idea for you. I'm going through grief. I'm really interested in investigating it. I've been listening to podcasts nonstop and reading books. I was thinking of Brene Brown, Eve Ensler, who wrote the Vagina Monologues. She had written a book on apology, apologizing after her father passed away, who was incredibly abusive to her. She wrote a book on apology with him apologizing to her. And I thought that was really fascinating. And I wanted to do a series of a grief apology healing, but I wanted to include writing because during my time of grief, I picked up another hobby, which was writing. And I was going to workshops at Imprint and just meeting writers and wonderful people around writing table groups. And so I tasked these artists who were not necessarily writers with writing a story about each topic. And so for several sessions, we got together. This is an image in my studio. Michael Carson is all the way on the left. He was one of my writing teachers at Imprint. And I asked him if he would come in because I'm not a writing instructor. And I said, can you help us? Can you help lead us in writing stories that are very personal to us and making them interesting to listen to? And so he was like, yeah, sure, I'll come in. And you can see our little name tags on that table. You can also see the stack of writing. So we would write and then share it with each other. We would read it to each other. It was very personal, very intimate settings. We were revealing a lot of information to strangers, even though it was a small setting. And it was difficult. It was a challenge, but it was a really good challenge. And I think all of us grew from it. And so this is like a behind the scenes collaboration of visual artists working in something that they're really uncomfortable with, kind of with writing. So you could see actually that was year one. And now we're moving into year three with 2021. Obviously the pandemic, we had to meet online. So these were irregular meetings. We didn't know what was going on, but we moved it to Zoom and we continued developing this exhibition. And I'm so grateful that we made it through to the fourth year. It's pretty epic. During that time, my husband is an audio producer and a musician and an editor and all that good stuff. This is Bradley Dean White. He was working with me with the idea of let's take these stories and record them. Let's find professional performers within the Houston area, ideally, and ask them to reinterpret these stories in their own voice as a character, kind of performing these for audio recordings. So I finally get my audio recordings to go with a painting. So he asked all of his friends, because he's an actor as well, and he worked over at the Alley for a while and he was in Around the World in 80 Days on stage. So some of you may have seen him. He asked several of the actors over there, Elizabeth Bunch and Chris Hutchison, David Rainey, if they would record. They did. Esty Burks has also been over there. And Terry Ismert is a very beloved theater teacher and performer from Houston. She just retired recently. And so all of these fantastic artists did voiceovers. There's a couple that are missing from here. One of them is the voice from The Witcher. Another one is Anonymous. And we'll bring those up later on as well. Then we got to work. The idea was, now we have our stories, let's start sketching. So you can see Ellie Orsak putting together some images from photography. These are some really rough sketches from Ellie Orsak, and the center is from Terry Wheeler, the right is from J.J. Baker, and they're just kind of working out some sketches. This is Pat McHenry's work all the way on the right, and Terry Wheeler's on the left. And there's just lots of sketches, lots of ideas, lots of things that were created and thrown away and revised again. We had a lot of time to work on this. And then here we go into Peggy Stoip, two different pieces of hers. And you'll recognize these in paintings coming up. And then this is a piece that I did. So during this time, it was kind of unexpected. This was late in the year of 2019. I got a call while I was teaching no, I wasn't teaching a class. I was doing a work of art with a group of students at Glasscock at Rice University. And I got a call from my mom's nephrologist saying that her dialysis was no longer working and they were going to have to take her off of it. And at that point in time, he was like, maybe 6 weeks. And it was really just devastating. You know, there's never a good time for this. A lot of friends told me I needed to go back to see my mom and say goodbye. And I was like, okay. And I called my mom and my mom was like, there's nothing you can do. You may as well just stay there. And I was like, what? So I did fly in there in North Carolina. I flew in and said goodbye, the best that one can say goodbye to their moms. And I took photos of her and she was already in the hospital, pretty much on her deathbed. And I did some sketches and came back and I wanted to be close to her. And this was the way that I could do it. I could feel like I was there by her bedside, while, waiting for the inevitable. And so this is kind of how I processed that grief. And I'm using charcoal, liquid charcoal here. Then we moved into the point of writing onto our canvases and supports. So those were the sketches. Now we're getting ready to paint. And you can see here, Peggy is in her studio and she is writing down the words from her story, from one of her stories onto the canvas. This was an agreement that we all made that we would somehow inscribe or endow our artworks with our writing before we began. So the writing would be our guide for our visual works of art. And in some of our pieces, the final works, you can see the writing coming through. Others, it's obscured completely. Sometimes it comes through as part of a composition, but I thought it was so important. These words have meanings. So on mine, when I started painting my picture, I used pencil and I drew my words into the gown that my mother was wearing that I last saw her in. Here's Ellie Orsak. You can see the words, the text over the fabric that she's painting. You can also get an idea of the scale of the paintings now that the artists are working on the paintings. Here's my drawing of my mom, so you can see the scale of it. It's larger than life. And I decided I was going to use this as my transfer image. So that meant that I was putting up a piece of vellum and tracing it. I ended up over tracing. I just get so into it. I zone in and start tracing like everything. And the idea is that I can remove that vellum and coat it with like a raw umber, an earth color, tape it back up and trace my lines. So that way I have the drawing and I have the painting. It didn't quite work that way because after I pulled the vellum off, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to draw it all over. I'm not going to transfer it. So I didn't transfer it all. I just started all over. And meanwhile, I started on my second painting on the right-hand side. So you can see I'm like, these things are so big. I'm staple gunning the fabric to the wall because I don't have stretchers large enough. This is my sketch on the left-hand side and then the piece on the right-hand side. This is called Matchsticks, and it's my apology piece. And then a very blurry photo of me looking kind of worried. I wasn't worried, I was just in motion. But that is a picture. You can see the text in the yellow coming out of the rays coming out of their heads. And then the piece on the right is more developed, a little bit more developed. And then this is the development of my piece of my mom. So you can see I'm working in layers and I'm kind of starting with a tonal underpainting, one color, and then building up over it with oils. Okay, here's some sketches from J.J. Baker's work. And this is kind of where he started, but he didn't end here. He continued working on his. You'll see the finished pieces. And this is kind of a view of my little studio. I constantly have all kinds of projects going on at the same time. I kind of get to my studio in between classes and I run in there and close the door and start painting and whatever I'm working on. So I've got oil paintings and acrylic paintings and stuff for this show, stuff for other shows. It's kind of always going on there. And then the third piece I did was this walking astronaut. He's the astronaut on fire walking on a beach. And then the next phase in this was finding somebody who could stretch the canvases. So the guy that I found drove up from Austin like a week before the show. I was so freaking out. I was like, oh, he's going to bail on me because he had a bad back. But no, he did come. He came with his stretchers. And he stretched these on the floor of my studio. And then that's me on the right-hand side varnishing. So you can get an idea of scale, how big this piece is. And then this is the pieces. These are the pieces varnished. So I couldn't really see them upright until I brought them to the Young Center and they were hung. So this is a picture of Pat and Ellie helping me hang this piece. I'm so terrified of heights. These women were running up and down ladders like it was nothing. And every time I ran out, I was like looking at that ladder like, oh, I can't go up that ladder. I'm going to pass out. They did a really awesome job. And here's more. This is the gallery. So this is kind of behind the scenes that a lot of people don't see unless you're in the art world of the artist hanging the show. There's a lot of people think, oh, you just drop off your artwork and it magically appears. But there's a lot of elbow grease that goes into it. So here's JJ's work. When you enter the gallery at the Young Center, you can see his three pieces there. And then I'm going to go back to Pat's work, which we're going to see in a bit. This is a gigantic piece of paper. I mean, it is amazing. When I saw this, I'm just gobsmacked at how huge it is. It takes two people to flip this piece of paper over. It's gorgeous, and then the painting on top of it is also gorgeous. Here is us. This is the installation of this work of art in the gallery. It had to be the centerpiece. And then we used technology with this exhibit because we had the recorded stories and we wanted to make sure people could use their phones in a gallery. I have for years been against people using their cell phones in galleries and museums. And finally, I was like, you know what? Let's just make it work. This is how we're going to do it. So people can go up and scan a QR code. The one on the right is what the tags look like in the gallery. They scan that. They can hold their phone up to their ear where they're looking at the picture, and they hear the story. They hear the performer reading it. Meanwhile, you can go onto the website, and on the left-hand side is an example of what someone would see on the website, and you click on it and you can hear the story. So this way, it just kind of brings the experience to a larger group of people. So here's a little bit more of installation. And I wanted to put these in here so you could see the scale next to people. Okay, now I'm getting into the show. And I have curated these slides, so it's as if you're walking into the show, you're going to see the work as it's laid out. And I helped to purposefully curate the show in this way. And that as you walk in on the right-hand side, you will see JJ Baker's work. And his work is very fractured. It's very abstracted. It's a little chaotic. And I feel like it is a really great introduction into this world of grief. He has 3 pieces in here. Here's Song, Cut, and Wax. And I highly recommend going to the website to listen to these pieces. I've selected 4 to share with you today, just based on time, and also what I think you can handle, I could handle within a short amount of time. It's a lot of information. So I want to make sure that it's not overwhelming. And I do recommend that when people go to the show, pick out a few pieces that really jump out at you and just listen to those and listen to the other ones later on. Taj is another wonderful piece. The Taj is actually a piece about a student of JJ's who was going into his art. He taught art to kids, and he would show up at the class beforehand and he kept drawing a rose. He just kept drawing this rose. And at one point in time, JJ's experience, he kind of challenged this kid to draw something different. And the story continues on and about how this kid eventually just disappears and he doesn't know what happened to him. And he wonders if this kid is still drawing that same rose. And it's just a really lovely story. Then we go into a little bit more chaos. Then the exhibition moves from this kind of disjointed feeling, a little abstract, moving into more chaotic waters. Here's Terry Wheeler's The Jacket. This is a personal story of his with his father, and a jacket that's been passed down through generations. And then we move into Ellie Orsak's Guilt Cookies. And this is a portrait of her ex-husband. And I am going to share the audio with you on this. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen for now and just pop over. Whoops. God, I got to share I'm going to share my screen if I'm going to pop over. Otherwise, I'll just disappear. So hold on one second. I'm going to start my screen. And I am popping over to my website. Here we go. Okay, so this is what you'll see on the website. This is going to be Ellie's work on Guilt Cookies. And this is, let me see how long this is. Oh, it doesn't say. It should say in a moment how long this piece is. It's pretty short. Here we go.
You are sleeping in the same hole-ridden sweater the caregivers say you refuse to take off. I enter the darkened room with Guilt Cookies and tube socks. Hello, I say, but your eyes are vacant, and then you start to cry. You don't recognize your ex-wife and mother of your children, or understand that you are a prisoner in a memory care facility and of your own deteriorating mind. I am so sorry. So sorry that you do not remember your children or will never hold your grandchildren. So sorry that you grabbed me around my neck and lifted me off the ground or pushed me into a table or raged at the slightest thing. I'm racked with guilt that you shouted at our children and me with a monstrous fury. So sorry, and so glad that you inspired me to remove my wedding ring and realize this was not a life story they or I would ever accept. I am so sorry and so thankful that I left you. The room is quiet. Light comes in from the window and shines on the pile of Wall Street journals that you no longer can read. I feel a little guilty that I'm thrilled to leave and flushed with the knowledge that I will never come back. And that's okay.
Okay, so that is Ellie Orsek's work there, and I'm going to come back to you now and stop sharing that. This is where it gets tricky because I have to go back and find my place. Let's see. I'm going to guess. Here we go. Okay, so now you kind of have a little bit of an idea of what this audio is about when it works with the paintings. So Terry Wheeler's box of photos, this is, we start getting into more like this architecture. There's like an architecture, and it kind of reminds me, paralleling with this idea of those original stories I was telling you about in Thailand, where people are talking about outside their home, you know, so the fractured part, that abstraction feels very big and far away. This starts feeling like it's getting a little bit closer to the internal state. We see architecture of familiar places, but it's not yet inside of our home. Even though this is a portrait of his mom, those are photos that are falling out of her hand. And then we're going to go to Peggy Stoip's Leaving Home. And I'm going to show you two in a row. So this is a piece that Peggy created about her mother moving out of her home into an assisted living facility. If any of you have elderly parents and have gone through this or are getting ready to go through this, it is really challenging. It's super challenging. So this piece, I love that she made the mother figure this screaming cat, and these men are just dragging from this warm house with glowing yellow lights into this cold place. And then you've got this little pink tiara that's just on the side, just thrown to the side, that fell off. You're going to hear that pink tiara come up in the story. I also want to show you this image, Pat McHenry's Alive video, picture, Healing. You're going to hear the audio for this as well. This is kind of this magnificent, large, light-colored, inspiring piece that it's at the very, and it's opposite the front door at the very end of this hallway. It's just the bright light and the hope that we need. The text that goes with it is rather biting. And I'm not gonna talk about it anymore. I'm just gonna show it to you. I'm gonna let you listen to it. So hang on 1 second. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you and find my audio. Okay, there's that. And give me a second. I gotta scroll through and find these. There we go. Okay. Here's Leaving Home. All right, so this one's a little bit long. Just be prepared. It's 5 minutes, 21 seconds. Sometimes I like to know how long things are so I can prepare. So here's Leaving Home, read by Elizabeth Bunch by Peggy Stoip.
I remember your 90th birthday party, Mom, just 2 years ago. Of course, you thought it was foolish, but I think you actually enjoyed having the people who loved you there, and the party balloons, and even the silly pink birthday crown. I'm sorry that you have to leave your home. After 91 years in one city, 56 years in one house, you have to move to a little apartment in another state. I know this means the loss of your car, your independence, your freedom. Even little things like meals will be on someone else's schedule, not yours. You are furious. and maybe in shock. I don't think you even accept that I am being forced to do this. The most determined, stubborn person I know has to deal with what she always feared would happen. It was just a couple months after the party. Do you remember the fall? The broken ribs, the losing touch with reality from the pain meds? I got you back home, but it couldn't last. The assisted living place is nice and close to Becca in Massachusetts, but not home. Never home. I'm taking pictures of the whole house so I can help you to remember. Do you realize how I tried to prevent this? Cell phone for emergencies. Too expensive, might get broken. It went into a drawer. Medic alert pendant. Annoying, irritates my neck. It went into the drawer too. Home caregiver to help with chores and medications. Didn't like them. They were strangers and intruders to you. You canceled that service without letting me know. So when the day came that you fell in the bathroom and hit your head, no one knew, because no one was intruding on your house, and you couldn't call for help. You lay there in a daze for 2 days, not remembering the phone in the room that you could use to call for help. You finally did figure it out, and the paramedics had to break into the house to get to you because no one came around with a key. I was facing possible charges of elder abuse if I let you go back home alone. Now there is no time, and there are so many details to work out. The house will have to be sold. 50 years of memories and living all have to be removed, distributed, or given away. It's a hard business when I know that practically everything is a precious memory to you. There's the ancient black hat box containing your own baby clothes and the battered old wash tub your mother used to do her laundry. This is hurting me terribly, but I have to be quick and efficient and not stop to think about it too long. The real estate agents came to look the house over and talk about how to best sell it. All personality, it seems, must be removed. The dusky rose-colored carpet you loved has to go. They called it pink carpet. Managed not to wrinkle their noses at it too much. Gotta show that hardwood floor underneath. The cheerful red wallpaper you hung by yourself in the kitchen has to go too. And the solid maple cabinets that you installed need to be repainted in a neutral gray shade. I take a deep breath and yield to necessity. But I draw the line at painting over the paneling in the family room. One small victory. The house is mostly cleared out now, and the remodelers will come in after I leave. Once I step out the front door, I, too, will never see the house I grew up in again. Don't think about that. Just about what needs to be done. The house is silent. One sight, though, breaks my heart. The little pink happy birthday crown that you wore last year is still lying on the mantle. It did mean a lot to you, after all. I'm glad of that, at least. It's been a year or so now, and you're finally settling into your new apartment. You've adjusted better than I could have hoped. Maybe better than I would have in your situation. You were strong enough not to give up, and even though your memory has altered itself, so that now you believe I forced you out of your home for no good reason, you can now look at me and smile and say, I forgive you. It will have to be enough.
Okay, so that is Peggy Stoip's work. And you can see these are stories that are incredibly personal. And it is very easy for so many people to relate to these experiences, which I think helps people who are viewing this. You know, some people need these stories just to feel like they're not isolated. And I find when that happens and people tell me that that's been their experience, I think that the show is very successful in that regard. So here is Pat's story, Pat McHenry, read again by Elizabeth Bunch. And this is called Alive.
I got nothing. Healing what? I feel rebellious, which is to say, unhealed. From what would I need to be healed? The cuts that I make to give away the precious parts of myself? I walk on stumps. I hold on with my elbows. The damage has been done. Life is short, too short for repair. What an ugly pattern this is. Learned early, learned often. Bypass yourself. Automatic now, but I imagine it took some time to learn as a child exactly how to mold myself to please. This is a woman's Pyrrhic victory. To be beloved at too great a cost. Instincts lost. Ambitions aborted. Crippled longings in the dense mist of others' expectations. What a waste. Where is my "and still I rise" moment? I want my feet and hands back, to sew them on, golden stitch by stitch, to reappear with magic and hard work. I take back what is mine.
That is a super powerful piece. So let me go ahead and pause that, and I'm going to come back over to all of you to share, go back over to the exhibition. Okay, so let me see if I can find, we're close, almost. Zoom and its glitches. Okay, so after this giant piece that visually is just open and spacious and bright and bold, now we're moving forward into what Pat had mentioned as body parts. It's the wall of parts, legs. Terry Wheeler's story about an old friend of his he hadn't seen in years until his friend was in the hospital and had to have a leg amputated. And it ended up not preventing his death. He had an incredibly painful exit. So this is a story about Terry's his final visit with him and how it impacted him. I would dare say even from the stories, maybe even haunted him thereafter. And then another Pat McHenry piece, Long Gone. This is her grief piece, and it is about her mother having dementia. And you can see the text in the clothing a little bit. Maybe not this picture, but she's got little words in the clothing. Peggy Stoip, Parting. This is about a family pet. So some of these are about people, some are about pets, some are about internal turmoil. This is a story about her son's pet and how everyone was out of the house and at work or out of town when this dog needed to be put down. And this is Peggy's story of having to put this dog down on her own. And I would dare say listening to this piece is also about growth, because I don't think you can go through grief without some type of growth as well. I think they move hand in hand. And we'll come back to that theme as well with how the show develops. This piece is called Matchsticks, and it was originally written as like a big fight with my husband. I'm just going to admit that. And I wrote him an apology because he deserved one. And then as he was reading it, I was like, that would make a really great written piece for my artwork. And so I took it back and I made a work of art out of it. So now he's got the written piece and he's got the artwork. That's what I told him. This piece was read by somebody who goes by Anonymous because of contract laws with SAG and Screen Actors Guild. and union. So if you hear it, you will probably notice that the voice sounds very familiar if you've ever heard any promotions on television for upcoming blockbuster movies. That voice will probably sound very familiar. And then this one is the last audio I'm going to share. This astronaut walking through, this is actually a beach. This is based on a real beach where I landed when I landed in Thailand. And I landed in Koh Samui. I'm going to let the piece speak for itself, especially since I have time to take questions after this presentation. So I'm going to hop back over to the audio portion of this. And I felt like this is definitely my most revealing piece, in that it's, sharing something that's really challenging and also somewhat embarrassing. It dealt with some shame, but also just real like trauma, serious trauma. And you'll see what that's all about once I pull it up. Okay, so this is a 5-minute long piece. It's the last audio of this presentation.
I watched a plane insert itself into an evaporating skyscraper while I meandered dazed toward a street corner. Towers crumbled to the ground in spectacular billows of smoke. For 2 nights, alarms chirped from trapped firemen's uniforms. Sound bounced across water into my apartment like a choir of echoing crickets. By the 3rd day, the chirping stopped. City streets sat eerily still. Poles and windows were ruffled from weathered paper faces of the missing. A unified echo publicized, "Never forget." 9 weeks later, the sky would fall out of itself. Earth would plow through tiny fragments of rock no bigger than grains of sand. The granules would heat up in a raging fury and vaporize, allowing only the lucky few a glimpse of several thousands of luminous meteors shedding to the ground. On September 11th, 2001, I hadn't been held in a year. The same may not have been true for my husband. 2 weeks after the towers collapsed in billows of smoke, we escaped the city, boarded a plane, and headed for an island in Thailand. I found myself trying to forget with a man I thought I knew. After our 3rd night, he barely mumbled. He was gay. The newspapers headlined that the showers peaked early Tuesday, sending fireballs streaking through the atmosphere each hour. We agreed to a coin toss to determine who would stay in this new world and who would return to the old smoldering one inches deep in ashes. He lost our game and was sent back to NYC to pack years of our belongings in storage. I dug my toes into the sand on the tropical island. The concentration of meteors vary sporadically each year, depending on whether the Earth smacks into sparse or thick bands of the comet's debris. The thicker the bands, the more sky will collapse. The night he said goodbye, I anchored myself in a bar on the beach, sharing buckets filled with neon straws of Sangsum and Coke with beach dwellers. I watched young men with 6-pack abs play football by the water. I wanted to devour them all. "They're like asparagus," said the elderly British man next to me. "Better by the dozen." He was speaking from experience, and for a while he turned out to be right. Night after night, I shoved tables together at bars and climbed barefoot up chairs to my dance platform. A slopping drink was balanced in one hand, while the other used the arm of a man I prowled to ascend the scaffolding of bar stools. I would follow those men home and never pronounce their names. It took approximately 6 weeks before I blacked out, my interior firmament as dark as the sky. To witness the spectacular, Earth must move through the meteoroid stream of particles left behind from the passage of the unstoppable comet. Frozen gases evaporate under the heat of the sun to create the most dazzling display. The showstopper is named after the constellation Leo, otherwise known as the Lion. One morning I was ready. I pushed myself up from the sand that stuck to my body like ashes. I wiped myself clean from debris, ready to walk through the next fire. And the next.
And that is The Spectacular, again by Elizabeth Bunch. I wish I would have mixed up some of the performers with the audio because they're all so good. Do this, and I'm going to share this again and come back to the show. So let me see if I can get this a little bit closer this time. Almost. Okay. So The Spectacular, and I could talk about that piece later on if anyone has any questions about it. That piece definitely dealt with a lot of tragedy in it. And of course, there's always more fires to walk through. Then we moved into Ellie Orsak's An Empty Bed. So now we're getting into very personal terrain. We're inside the home. We're inside the family. We're dealing with internal issues at this point. The focus is pointing inward. And this reminds me very much of the third hour of my original painting so long ago. This is a painting of my mother, the one that I had done the drawing of. This is the final rendering of it. And I put it on a wall with these other paintings. The one all the way on the left was a portrait that I did of my mom when she came to visit me in 2017. She passed of complications due to MS, and it was really difficult for her to sit for me. She's sitting in her wheelchair, but I painted her then. And then the sketch is her on her deathbed saying goodbye. The painting is after she had passed. And then the picture all the way on the right is a self-portrait a year after she died. So it's kind of this familial process of grieving. This goes into Ellie Orsak's The Comfort Zone and the meaningfulness of her having a safe haven with her husband in this beautiful bed that they've created. And then it goes into Pat McHenry's Scene Apology. We start going into this kind of rejuvenation mode, an idea of, succulence, everlasting life, these, although I have to admit, I think I'm the only person on earth that kills succulents. I don't think I've told Pat that before, but for some reason I can't keep these things alive. But I do like the idea that they're very green and beautiful and they're growing and what they signify. And then we have this gorgeous growth. Peggy Stoip, this is the end piece of The Foundation Endures. And this is a piece of her father passing away. He died in an airport on the way to visit his family on Christmas. And so they had to go, instead of Christmas, celebrating Christmas, they had to go to his funeral. And her discoveries after the funeral about how she really didn't even know him as well as she thought she did. And she knows him more now. And then to figure out how old he would be at a certain point, when she was writing this, the idea that he would have been 100 years old if he had still been alive, and how miserable he would have been. So it's kind of this really beautiful acceptance. It's coming to terms and acceptance with grief. And then, of course, the show starts all over again. So it's just this one big cycle that keeps happening again and again. I wanted to show this because it is my favorite photograph from opening night. I absolutely love the idea of this child pointing to this grief, this woman on her deathbed. and it being discussed with her mother, this generational thing, this growth and death that happens to everyone, and how it's integrated in with some families, and not as a scary thing, but as an inevitable thing, and how to work with that in our culture. I feel like there's not very many places to discuss grief openly. I know that from my experience, both my parents died about 6 months apart, that there was an inner core of friends that I could talk to for a certain amount of time. And then after that amount of time, it was kind of hard to talk about it because, you don't want to keep going on and on. And that's what support groups are for, or spouses can be there for, family. So it can be isolating. And I love the idea that this show welcomes people who may be getting prepared to go through these scenarios or have experienced them and need a place to go where they feel like they're being heard and understood. And that was kind of the basis and the thesis of this show. So this is just to remind you, if you're interested, if you're in Houston, the show is up through December 20th. There's plenty of time to go. And I will say also a little plug for our artists. The artwork is all for sale, and there are prints that are for sale as well. There's prints that have the audio on the back of them. So you can scan the QR code with the print and you can listen to the stories. So that is the whole show. So let me come back to you and see if I can take any questions.
Perfect. And just as a reminder, just go ahead and type them in the chat and we'll read them out loud, and that way we can share with everyone your thoughts and questions. Oh. So we have a raised hand. Is Lauren available to unmute, or is it, would you like to type your question in the chat? Can you unmute? Yes. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. That was so profound to share this whole presentation, and I think the audio piece was just so beautifully, illustrates the visual. It was just so profound for you to share this with us, and so important too as some healthcare providers that we have this outlet. I'm a nurse practitioner in radiation oncology, and I teach full time at the University of St. Thomas. And this is something that is very important that I teach my nursing students all the time, that there has to be a creative outlet so that we can give, we can continue to give with the work that we do. So thank you for this, Ms. Spector.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you could see this.
I am now hoping to go to the Young Center to take a visit.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, there is a question in the chat from Dr. Ray. Were there any challenges in using the mixed media of audio and visual?
I think so. I think that the challenge mainly came from artists crossing genres of artwork, because none of us were professional writers. None of us were, a lot of us hadn't exercised that muscle before. So we definitely needed to deal with it with, just gently and with a really great teacher, which we had. Michael was really wonderful. I highly recommend trying to, jump into another genre of art making if you get the chance. If you've never, writing, it seems a lot easier than like say, oh, I'm going to play some piano, it's a little bit more accessible. I think that it ended up being a better experience than more of a challenge at the end of the day, because I think all of us as artists realized that writing is a really great outlet to also begin brainstorming for additional artworks. I know a couple of us, like JJ Baker, has gone into continuing mixing writing and words with his artwork. I'll probably continue doing that as well. There's something super powerful about, even if no one sees it, endowing the artwork with words before you start painting. because they just last. And I'm imagining like years later, if someone were to x-ray your artwork, that word or those words would still be there. And that's kind of powerful.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. So there is another question, a couple actually. Actually, this is a comment. This was very grounded. Terry says this was very grounded and important work that an artist and non-artist could engage in as an outlet to work through the grief. And I think we saw that in your very poignant and beautiful presentation. And there's another. Thank you, Laura. This was very interesting and valuable. I would love to hear more about your reasons for painting an astronaut, who in my mind will be very well protected against any of the physical challenges that you depicted.
Yes. I think there's multiple reasons why, but I love the idea of just being completely coated and just walking through fires, and the idea of just looking so alien and out of place. I definitely felt that way. I felt very alien and out of place sometimes when I was over in Thailand. 10 years is a long time to spend in such a foreign country. To the point where there was a certain point where I was like, oh, I don't know what other people look like who are my age, who look like me. Like I didn't even have a concept of what people wore or what they might, how I was supposed to look as I aged. So I oftentimes felt a little bit like an alien. But I think going through all of that really tumultuous stuff, I wish I had that armor to protect myself, and I didn't. And then I also think it's a little ode to Houston, you know, because who doesn't love astronauts if you live here? They're pretty cool. So there's many reasons. And I think I'm sure that on a subconscious level, it has a lot to do with trying to protect myself and layer myself, even through the artwork. It's so much easier to talk about trauma and grief when you put up these layers and you talk about, like, if I were to write in third person, or, you know, nothing is harder than writing and painting in first person. I think that is the biggest challenge.
Wow. So I actually have a question. I don't have any right now in the chat, but so as an artist, is this an opportunity to really be understood? You know, when you have your words and you have your story attached to your work, you know, a lot of us think it's up to interpretation, but is it really ever up to interpretation when you look at an artist's work in a gallery?
That's a great question. I feel like oftentimes artists have more success when they don't say anything about their work, and when viewers just get to put their ideas onto the work, what they think it means to them. And I think that's a great circumstance for artists. We want people to connect with our work, whatever that means for them, for the viewers. I think for me, I love the idea when my artwork can be experienced from young to old and international. I feel like the only thing holding back the truthfulness of this work is that it's in English and that it's not written. I feel like it could be expanded even further if there were other languages available and if people had text to read. Although I really wanted it to be experienced through the performance, which gave us like another separation away from the work, which was very painful. I don't think anyone would want to hear all the artists reading their work and breaking down and crying. So it was really good to have that buffer of a performer. And they really treated it like a script. Like they broke it down into notes and they knew where they were going to emphasize things or break or any of that. That was all prescribed by them. I think that as far as my work goes, I think that it's the most bare I have laid myself in front of my audience. It is the most personal work. And I know it to be the case because every once in a while I'll think, I can't believe I just put that out to the world. So like, now everyone knows everything. And it can be really embarrassing and challenging on a personal level. But on the other hand, it's good because more and more people are relating with that vulnerability. And everybody has their stories. Everybody has their weird points in time. And I think that, you know, I'm not somebody who overshares. I tend to like to undershare. So I guess if this is my overshare, at least it's artfully done.
Oh, it was beautiful. You show the range of emotions and shared vulnerability. It's very poignant. Well, we have one, it's 1 o'clock. I do have a very practical question. Where can one take a class with you is the question.
That's a wonderful, thank you. Thank you for asking that. You can go to my website. That would be the easiest way to find my classes at lauraspector.com. And I have my classes listed out. There's also a newsletter that you can sign up for on the opening page of my website, because I don't know where else to put it on the website. So yeah, you can visit that. You can also, any art school, I teach at so many art schools, you could probably just click on one locally and I'll be there. So I'm at Glasscock, Art League, Watercolor Art Society, and I teach out of my studio. So yeah, just contact me. I'm happy to talk to you.
Sounds amazing. And that was from Lauren. Okay, well, it's just about 1 o'clock. If anyone has any other questions, just an extra couple of minutes, but I don't see any coming on right now. Give me 1 second. Just your website on the chat.
Great.
But it's been wonderful. I would like to thank you on behalf of the McGovern Center, Laura, and everyone that has been here today. I just want to make a note that please plan to join us again at our next session. And we're finalizing those plans now, so stay tuned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful.
Thanks.
All right.